are joining us, but I think we'll go ahead and get started with introductions. My name is Chantel Arnold. I work at Fort Hays State and the financial aid office. I'm a financial aid counselor, and I'm starting my 11th year. And today I will be co-hosting this presentation with Caitlin. Caitlin, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name's Caitlin Dorff. I am from Barton Community College. I've been working financial aid for the last roughly 7 years, and I'm eager to get the show on the road.
Caitlin, I'll let you just go ahead and take on, and we'll go from there, and I'll start sharing my screen.
Okay. Give me just a second here. Okay, are we able to see that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So today we will be going through the FAFSA kind of step by step. Just if you have questions, do feel free to send them in the chat. And if nothing else, we'll get you here at the end as time permits. Okay. So first off, we're going to start with just the website of studentaid.gov. With this studentaid.gov, it offers many different resources. This is, of course, where a student would go to fill out the FAFSA. They would go to apply for aid and complete the aid process there. It also is helpful for needing to look up loan information. There are other resources available to students through this website as well, including entrance counseling and master promissory note, which would be needed in order to receive a loan at an institution. So the FSA ID is what the student would use to get logged in, but we'll follow up on that in a little bit. Studentaid.gov/resources is a very helpful tool if you're looking for a video, kind of a step-by-step video. They're quick ones, but they're pretty neat as far as simple processes, how the FAFSA works. It won't go into detail like we will today, but just general information. Financial aid toolkit.ed.gov/TK. That one is beneficial for high school counselors. That one gives you guys access to all sorts of resources, whether they be handouts, emails, videos, anything like that. So that if you don't know of that one yet, you might write that one down and take a look at it for later reference. So let's see here. Yes, sorry. So logging in, as I mentioned, a student will use their FSA ID. And if a parent and student are needing to submit the FAFSA, or if it's a dependent student, so the parent is needed, both of them will need an FSA ID. It is important that they both use different emails to set this up. They shouldn't be able to make an account with the same email, but if they are, it's not good news because it gets all sort of combobulated. So just make sure that the student and the parent create their own FSA ID before they move on. Once they create their username and password to get logged in, the student can get in. If they've ever filled out a FAFSA before, they might be able to just log in there. Otherwise, they would use the Start Here button. So then when it comes to role selection, this is just indicating who is going to be filling out the FAFSA. So if the student's filling out the FAFSA, they would simply click on I am the student and want to access the FAFSA form. They will input their FSA ID to log in and go on their way. As far as if it's a parent filling out the FAFSA, they would indicate in which they are a parent filling out the FAFSA, and they would include or they would be prompted for the student's personal identifier information, such as like social security number, birth date, name, and then it would then prompt them for the student's FSA ID. So just make sure that they have that information available if they are helping the student fill out the FAFSA. So next we will look at the dependent student with parental data. That's the one we'll cover today. There may be some situations where you have students who are an independent student, maybe through foster care, maybe they're emancipated minor, maybe they're at risk of homelessness, what might be. So if they do meet the dependency requirements to become an independent student, they of course would not have to include their parental data. But today we're just going to go through the dependent student with parent data. So with the FAFSA, there are 7 steps and/or sections to the FAFSA application. Student demographics, school selection, dependency status, parent demographics, parent financials, student financials, and then sign and submit. Again, if independent, the parent demographics, parent financial information would not be requested. Okay, so first we have the student demographics. This one will ask for, or this section would ask for the student's social security number, birth date, name, telephone, email, anything like that. And their address. Student residency, this is just confirming their state of residency as well as their citizenship. And so if they are not sure if maybe they've moved recently from a different state and they're just not sure what they would be considered, what state, it's always kind of a good practice to contact the school that they are planning to attend, and they can kind of outline what they look at as far as residency guidelines are. Student education. So at this point in time, they will indicate what their high school completion level will be as of the start of the 22-23 school year. So obviously, most often the students who fill out a FAFSA are going to be high school seniors and your circumstances. We do every once in a while get some that are maybe only a junior or something, but most often, obviously, you're going to be a senior filling this out. And so at that point in time, if they graduated in May, their status would be a high school diploma and or GED diploma if that's the route they went. And then they would also be asked if they are, what degree or certificate they're going to be working towards at the start of 22-23. So if they're attending a 2-year, so like Barton Community College, and they plan to complete just a 2-year degree and then be able to go into the workforce, there's an option for that. There's also an option for a 2-year to transfer. And of course, if they're going straight to a university and their plans are a bachelor's, they'd indicate that first bachelor's degree. As far as whether that student has completed a bachelor's degree before 22-23, this question can get a number of students. They don't quite read it fully or they don't understand it maybe, but they do want to be cautious on that one, because if they do mark yes that they've completed a bachelor's degree already, they might possibly not be caught on that, and they would be automatically not eligible for federal Pell Grant, because you can't receive federal Pell Grant after you've received a bachelor's degree. So keep an eye on that one. And then of course, what year college level would you be entering? So most often, again, the students that you would be helping would most likely be a freshman, unless they of course have completed roughly 30-31 hours, then they may be considered a sophomore. Again, if you're unsure, it's always beneficial to contact that institution they will be attending. And then of course, federal work study, if they're interested in working on campus, they would mark yes. If they don't know, of course, they don't know, and so forth. Selective service. So this is no longer a requirement on the FAFSA. So they'll go ahead and answer the question. However, if they say no, or if they don't register anything, they will not be flagged and required to complete that step. The Department of Ed has taken that off of the necessary requirements in order to receive federal aid. Student driver's license number, that if a student doesn't have a driver's license for some reason, they do not have to include it. It's not going to prevent them from moving forward on the FAFSA application. It's mainly used for the Department of Ed and schools to prevent identity theft at all possible. So that's the main reason the driver's license number is listed or prompted on the FAFSA. Foster care and parent education. So the FAFSA asks a student about foster care twice in the application. The first one is asking if they've ever been in foster care. The second question later on in the FAFSA is asking if they've been in foster care after the age of 13. So this first time it gets asked, it is mainly wanting to see if they've ever been in foster care. If so, they may be eligible for a tuition waiver with that state. So if they have been, the Department of Ed should mention that on their student aid report or their SAR, and then they can contact the institution and see where to reach out to get that tuition waiver filled out. At our institution, they go through the business office, but it might be different per institution. And then on the same screen, they will indicate their parent's highest level of schooling. So whether it's high school, maybe they didn't complete high school, maybe they completed a 2-year, 4-year, so on. They just need to select to their best knowledge what their parents have completed. Student eligibility. So this is just asking if they've ever received federal aid, student aid, and then if they've been convicted of possession of sale or illegal drugs while receiving federal student aid. Again, this is one that they have taken off of the FAFSA, and that's not necessarily the question, but they are no longer prevented from receiving aid if they would answer yes to that question. So of course, have them answer it truthfully, but again, they won't be prevented from federal student aid because of that reason anymore.
Caitlin, I might add on that question, if they've been convicted while they had the aid. So if they got convicted in high school and they had not received federal aid at that time, their answer would be no. They actually have to have the conviction at the same time they're getting the financial aid. And that trips up a lot of students. Again, it's not going to affect their eligibility any longer, but they do still want to answer it accurately.
Thank you. Okay, and then as far as school selection goes, this is where they're going to indicate their high school information. So where they're attending currently, they can look it up by state. It's easiest if you just input at least city and state, and that usually brings it down to just a couple options to select the correct high school from. And then this is also the section where you will include the school in which they will be attending or wanting to attend. They can include up to 10 different institutions on this page. You might let them know that most every institution will likely reach out to them. So just know if you put in 10 schools might be contacting them. But if they're undecided, that's definitely a good option. Otherwise, they can input their state, city, school name, or they can get the federal school code from the institution that they are going to be attending. All right, dependency status. So this one, the questions are split up a little bit differently than they are listed here on this page, but this was just kind of a good outline of the questions. So a number of students come to us and say, well, I'm an independent. However, unless they meet these requirements, any of these requirements, they would not be an independent. So living on their own or providing majority of their own support, or doing their own taxes, that doesn't necessarily qualify them to be an independent student. It would be, if they don't meet any of these questions, they may contact their institution that they're looking to attend and see if there's anything they can do as far as getting that updated otherwise. So of course, if they are 24 or older, they're married or separated, will not be working or would be working towards a master or doctorate degree, have children, have dependents, serving active military, veteran of the armed forces. Again, there's the foster care after the age of 13, emancipated minor, or in legal guardianship. Legal guardianship does trip up a number of students. That means if they're in someone else's guardianship other than their biological parents. A number of people, students look at that as they have a dependent, so that's legal guardianship. So that it's kind of the opposite where someone else has legal guardianship of themselves. And then if the student is an unaccompanied youth or homeless, at risk of homelessness, that would most institutions will verify that, and the student would fill out a document and verify that, and the McKinney-Vento representative, most likely at the school, would help fill that out. Okay, so then once the student's dependency status is determined, the FAFSA will let them know. And of course, if they're a dependent student, it is very highly suggested to include parent information, because if it is not and they are dependent, they will be flagged and asked to add the parent information anyways. Again, if there is some reason that is preventing them from being in contact with their parents, and they don't meet the dependency requirements, however, reach out to the institution they're looking to attend. And again, they can provide a little bit more guidance on that. So whose information should be provided? This section is not necessarily going to have you input any information. It's just for students who just aren't sure who to include on the FAFSA. So if they aren't sure, go through and have them click on the one that is accurate, and then they will let you know a little bit more information on what information will be needed. Okay, let's see here. I believe that is the end of my portion. I will let Chantel go ahead and take over.
Thanks, Caitlin. Before we move into the next section, I just wanted to touch on a few things. We had some questions that were presented to us on the last presentation that we did. We had lots of questions about residency. We had questions about who is my parent. We had questions about the foster care questions. So I was going to take just a second to discuss some of those that we received. Lisa, I do see your note there about legal guardianship, and that is correct. It has to be a legal guardianship. It has to have been done through the court, and most schools are going to ask that they provide that documentation. And so that is something to keep in mind when you're helping students, is maybe they're staying with a family member, maybe they're staying with a friend. That does not put them into a legal guardianship. They would still use their parent information. Now, in cases where they can't get that information, if there's abuse, things like that, their schools can help them walk through that. But legal guardianship, they would have to provide that documentation. And then this is another resource. Can everyone see this infographic that we provided?
Yes.
On the screen? Okay. This is provided by federal student aid, and I can send this link in the chat. This is open to you guys, and we have found it to be very helpful in explaining these to students, who their parent is. And it's very detailed. It says here that a grandparent, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, foster parents, that is not their parent. Their parent is their biological parent and the step parent of the biological parent that they are living with. And it goes through step by step. Are they married to each other? If yes, you use both of them. If no, do they live together? If yes, then you would use both of them. If no, it's the parent that they lived with for more than 12 months in the past year. If that parent is remarried, then it's both of them. So again, that link is in the chat, and we have found that to be very, very helpful in how to determine who a student should be considering as a parent when they're filling out their FAFSA. Another resource, and it's listed on that infographic, is this webpage on that infographic. It's a web page that's provided by student aid, and this goes through a lot of the questions that we were referred to from the last presentation. Again, who is my parent? What do I do if my parents are divorced or separated? Do I use my step parent? Do I not use my step parent? And then down towards the bottom of this page, it even talks about how to go about parents who are not citizens of the US. Do they include them? How do they include them? What information do they provide to them? And so in those instances, this would be a resource that everyone may benefit from and would be something that you guys may want to keep handy as you're helping students complete the FAFSA. Let's see if I can figure out how to get back to the PowerPoint. So if there is a legal guardianship, then they would not use the parent info. They would answer that they are in a legal guardianship, and that then would exempt them from providing parent information altogether. They would be considered an independent student. Okay, is there any other questions about what we've covered so far? Okay, then we're gonna see if I can skip through. We'll talk a little bit here. Again, parents' marital status. Remember, it's the parents who the student lived with 50% or more in the prior 12 months and their spouse if they're married. You can refer to that infographic that I provided. As a best practice, sometimes it's easier when you're doing this and you're thinking of parents, think about them. Parent 1 is the first parent on the tax return. Parent 2 is the second parent on the tax return. Just as we move through this, that's something that's a little helpful in keeping things straight as you're filling things out. When did your parents get married or remarried? This is a best estimate. Sometimes students don't know this and then they find out. It just needs to be close. If they do have it in there, it does help. And if they go in and change it, it can cause some issues. So just help them to fill it out to the best of their ability and get as close as possible. If my kids asked me what year I got married, I would have to stop and think. So I'm positive I gave them the wrong information a time or two. Here again, when you're entering the parent information, list them in order as they are on the tax return. It just makes it easier for them to be consistent as they go through so that they're not mixing it up and putting parent 1's income for parent 2 and things like that. It's basic information. They'll need a parent social security number, last name, first initial, date of birth, and then their email address. The email address may be used by schools if they need to reach out in cases of Parent Plus loans or if they're needing additional information to move the process along.
I have
In
a
the
quick
event-
question.
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt, but I didn't want to get too far away from this topic before I asked. I was told by a director of financial aid at a junior college this year that the parent that they need to put down as their parent is now going to be the parent that provides 51% or more of their financial support. Because I have a student who lives with one of the parents for the majority of the time, but the other parent provides more than half of the financial support. So they are
And that is
confused.
correct. It is
Okay.
51% of who provides the support. In
So
most
it's not
instances,
50% of who they live with then.
correct. In most
Okay.
instances, the parent they live with is providing 51% or more of the support.
Okay.
But there are those rare instances like you're talking about where the other parent can document that they're providing 51% or more, and that is who they should include.
So that is, okay. That's what we were trying to clarify with that family. So thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay. The parents' state of legal residence, again, this is just their state of legal residence. This one specifically asks about District of Columbia. They'll just walk through these and answer them accurately. As far as the parents' household information, who to include in the household can be kind of tricky, but what they want to know is who lives at that place and receives their support. So if an uncle pops in and out but isn't there 50% of the time and they don't pay for him, you wouldn't count the uncle. But if grandma lives there and she's there the majority of the year and the parents are providing the support for grandma, then grandma would be included in the household. Children, if they have children that have left and went to college and they're filling it out for the youngest one or the middle one, if that student that has left and went to college is still eligible as a dependent student on their FAFSA, then they would be included as living in the home. Even if they rent an apartment and don't come home for the summer, they're still counted as in the household if they are a dependent student for FAFSA purposes. Another question we get is maybe mom is expecting. That unborn child can be counted if they're to be born during that award year. And so you can count that in that household. For those college students that have moved away, they must be enrolled at least half-time. So a student who moved away and is not taking at least 6 hours, they would not be included as living in the household. On to parents filing and parents' tax status. Another question we commonly get is, well, my child lives with me 50% of the time. I provide 50% of the support, 51% of the support, but my ex-spouse claims them on the tax return. So they have to claim them. That is not accurate. It does not matter which parent claims the student on the tax return. It's which parent provides 51% or more of the support in the 12-year period that you're reporting on. So once you've determined which parent is the parent that you're reporting for, then you'll use their tax return information. For the 22-23 year 22-23 award year, you're going to use the 2020 tax return. And we recommend that you have a copy of your tax return with you, or they do, when they're filling this out. It does make it much easier. As some things, especially the data retrieval tool, require things to be entered exactly as they have them on the tax return. It's going to ask them if they've already completed it or if it's in process. It's going to ask what type of form that their parents provided, and it's going to ask what the tax filing status is on that return. Then it's going to walk you through and ask you if you want to use the IRS data retrieval tool. I know at our institution, we recommend that any student is offered this, that they take advantage of that. It helps with errors. It helps processing go quicker. Students can get a more accurate picture of what they're eligible for a little bit sooner. And it does prevent some of the burden of providing additional tax documentation and paperwork after the FAFSA has been submitted in some instances. When they log into the IRS data retrieval tool, this is where having parent 1 and parent 2 and making sure you're using the right information is critical. Parent 1 is the one submitting it, that they're the ones signing the FAFSA. They're the ones that are going to enter the information on the DRT. They want to enter it exactly as it's listed on the tax return. And then as they go through the process of entering it, they want to make sure and make that they've got all of the information submitted. It's common that the last button to transfer the data is sometimes missed, and then it does not transfer the data back into the FAFSA. So they want to make sure and go all the way through that process and make sure they clicked all of the transfer now buttons so that it comes back into the FAFSA. If they do not use the data retrieval tool, then parents will walk through and will answer the individual questions that they're asked. Again, they need to use this off of their tax return, and there's help buttons along the way, as well as text prompts that tells them exactly what line to use on their returns so that they are providing accurate information. When it talks about how much income did your parents make from work, they do want to divide that out if there are multiple parents earning income. Showing that it's a one income family can have an effect on their eligibility for some types of aid. So if it is a 2-parent family, they do want to break that out using their W-2s or other tax documents by parent. Again, they want to make sure that parent 1 is who they have listed as parent 1 on their FAFSA. The next pages goes into more financial information. Asking for tax filers, if they're a tax filer, did they have any types of special financial aid that they're including? Did they have combat pay or special combat pay? Were there any college grants or scholarships reported in the parent's income? Education credits, untaxed portions of IRA distributions and pensions, IRA deductions and payments to self-employed, and then tax exempt interest income. One thing that I will point out is that when they're talking about IRA distributions and pensions, if a parent rolled over an IRA distribution and they can document that all of it was put back into a different IRA, they would not include that here. That can be exempted from being included because they don't have access to that money. And so for that reason, they would leave that out. Another thing that is a common error that we see when reporting assets, they don't include the value of the home that they live in. If they have rental properties or things like that, they would include that, but they don't include the value of the home that they live in. And then family farms and businesses with less than 100 people, they're not included in the assets. They would be included in net income, and that would be included, but the assets, the building, the combines, the tractors, if there's less than 100 people in those organizations, those assets are not included in there. On parent untaxed income and in the parent additional financial aid, it's asking about child support that they receive or that they pay. If they are not going to receive those payments for the award year, so the student turns 18 in July and that's the end, they don't record that they're receiving those child support payments because those will stop for the award year when the school or when the child is in school. And those are no longer resources that the parent has available to help them with school. Again, if you're stopping, you're paying child support, they would stop recording those payments as well. On the student financials, again, they want to have their tax return available if they filed. We have a lot of students that come in and say, well, I didn't file, I only made $1,000. They need to check with their tax accountant because there is different cutoffs for when they have to file. And sometimes students who don't file but are required to file will have to do that before they can get their financial aid. So students need to be making sure that if they should have filed, they have that done. And they need to talk to their accountant to see if they need to file. That's not something your financial aid office is going to be able to answer for you. We aren't accountants. And so we would recommend that you talk to an accountant about getting that done. Again, you're going to answer whether you have it completed or not, what type of form you used, and what your filing status was. And then if you're offered the data retrieval tool, you'll want to use that to help prevent what you have to have turned in on the back side after your FAFSA has been submitted. If you're married, which I know most of our high school seniors are not going to be, but in the event of an independent student, it would be using the student and the spouse. But if the student is not married, then it's just the student information. A question that we received after the last presentation, a student was trying to decide if they were a dependent or independent because they had a child themselves. In those instances, I would reach out to their financial aid office. There is a cutoff that determines if that student's parents are providing the support for that child, or if the parent, which is the high school senior, is providing that support for that child. There are instances where while they may live at home, they make enough income that they are considered supporting that child, and then they are eligible to claim themselves as independent students with that child as a dependent. So again, in that instance, I would reach out to those schools to get that income cut off to see if they are qualified to become an independent student. The students are going to be asked the same type of questions. This happens after they get out of the IRS data retrieval tool. And so they do need to go through and answer these questions. They shouldn't just skip through these screens. Again, it's asking the same type of things. Did they have an IRA rollover? Did they have any self-employment payments to an IRA? Any tax exempt interest income? Education credits, grants and scholarships, combat pay or special pay. It also asks if they're receiving child support. A common occurrence that we see is maybe a parent receives a child support payment, but the student reports that on their income. That's incorrect. Child support is paid to the parent. If that parent gives it to the student, that's fine, but it's paid to the parent, not to the student. So the student should not be including child support that they receive from their parents on their financial information on the FAFSA. Student assets, again, this is what they have available on the day they fill out the FAFSA. If they're filling out their FAFSA at 9 a.m. and buying a car at 2 p.m., they don't have that money and they wouldn't need to include that in their FAFSA. But if they have a savings account, if they have a 529 account that's in their name, they would need to include those as assets. And then the final step is for them to sign and submit this. Again, it does require for dependent students that they sign it as well as a parent signs it. If if they are paying someone to prepare this, then that preparer would go through and sign it. Very rarely do people have paid preparers. They might have assistance from someone, but they don't have a paid preparer. A parent helping a student is not a preparer. They are the parent and they would mark no on these questions. After both people have signed it, then they will see some estimates that are coming in. It will say that they, maybe what they're eligible for. It does give them a summary and they can keep this information. There are times when we'll need at the financial aid offices information from these reports. And so if they can keep it, have access to it, that is beneficial to them. But this does not mean they're done. They still have to continue on to another step. They have to agree to the terms of the FAFSA. This is a legally binding document and they can be subject to fines and penalties if they provide fraudulent information. So they want to make sure that they provide accurate information and that they agree to these terms. And then they sign and submit the FAFSA by clicking on the blue button. Here is where they'll actually enter the information. Again, whichever parent was listed as parent 1 should be the one that's signing the document, or parent 2 if that's who's signing the document. But make sure that those stay the same and they don't get mixed up and out of order. They will have to use their FSA ID, and the student is going to do the same thing. Once this has all been done, then they're going to get some feedback. It will provide a confirmation number, the data release number. There may also be estimates that are on there. It'll list what schools this information is being sent to. And that's it. The FAFSA is submitted. What will happen next is that each institution the student sent it to will receive an application, and they will reach out to the student. Most often, they're going to reach out to the email that's on the FAFSA for the student. So it is a best practice that they use an email that is available after graduation and not their high school email account. If they're selected for verification, they'll be notified of what documentation they need to submit. Institutions may require additional information. If that happens, they'll be notified as to what they need to submit and how to submit those things. Once it's complete, then the schools will send them an offer and let them know what their eligibility is. We do have instances where schools have to make adjustments or things are different. Maybe parents lost their job and are no longer working, but in 2020 they did work. Those are special circumstances, and we are doing some presentations on those types of things. But again, we would recommend that you reach out to your institutions and ask what the student needs to do.
So one quick question on that. Would you just have them go ahead then, if they already know they have some major income changes from 2020, go ahead and have them submit their 2020 IRS information and then make the changes with each college that they're interested in?
So they're required to submit the 2020 tax information. That's not an option. They have to submit 2020, and then they would reach out to those institutions and find out about doing what's called a professional judgment to adjust it to a more accurate income. If they submit it with the more accurate information, then we have to go back, change it to 2020, and then do the PJ. So we have to have the 2020 information originally, and then we adjust that.
Okay. We have a student who had a parent death over the summer. And so they just need to go ahead and still submit 2020 and then make the changes with the institution.
So they would submit the 2020 tax information, but they would exclude the deceased parent in the household.
Oh, they
So
can do that. Okay. Okay.
So when they're completing the household information, that's a snapshot in time of today. Who lives in that home today when I completed the FAFSA?
Okay.
Now, if they've already completed it, which they couldn't because it wasn't open until just this week.
Right.
But in the
right.
event that they've completed it and that parent would have been in the household, then through professional judgment, we can remove the parent and the income. But for the initial filing, they would use the 2020 income as it was on the tax return. They would exclude the parent from the household, and then they would reach out to do a professional judgment with that institution.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions at this time?
We just got a question in the chat from Amber.
Okay. Yes, mom and step parent would be included, and they would have been included regardless of the adoption. So because mom is married to step parent, mom and step parent are included, and now mom and adopted dad are included. Both ways they would include that. I've not been made aware of anyone that's been having issues when filing their FAFSA, but we haven't really received a lot of feedback yet since it just went live. Is anyone else hearing of issues with these error messages?
I do think, I don't remember if it was on Facebook or where, but FSA, Federal Student Aid, they did come out with a message. I think that there were some students struggling with an error, and they were working to fix it. That was last week though. So I haven't seen any updates since then.
Last night I had a student that was working on it, and it was in, I'm gonna have to stop and think, pensions. When they were putting it in, it wouldn't let them put in 0 or anything. I advised them to save, get out of it completely and come back. And they did, and it let it work, and they got it submitted. So yes, they were getting error messages in that section.
Okay, thank you. Amanda has asked, if a foster student is legally adopted by their foster family, how would they answer the foster care question? As Caitlin mentioned, there's 2 different questions on the foster care, and they would answer that accordingly. On the one in the dependency section, it asks, were they in foster care after age of 13? And so regardless of if they've been adopted, regardless of if they still have parents living or if they're no longer in foster care, they would answer yes, and that would make them an independent student. So after the age of 13, so 13 years old and 1 day, if they were in foster care on that date, they would answer yes to that question, regardless of if they're adopted or if parents are still living. If it was before age of 13, they would say no. And then they would answer the other question that yes, they had been at one time, but they're no longer there after age 13. And then that would go through and it would determine what questions they had to answer on parental information. Amanda, let me know if that doesn't clarify your question. Danelle. Okay, great. Thanks, Amanda. The FSA ID is not an actual number, correct? That is correct. It's a login. They have a login and password, and they can set a PIN, but it does not have to be just a number to get their FSA ID. Monique is asking if a student has a 529 plan that is in the student's name, does that affect how much money they can get from FAFSA? And it could. that is considered an asset that's usable for paying for college education. Therefore, it can reduce what their need-based aid may be. It increases their estimated family contribution. So it can have an effect on how much money they may be able to get from FAFSA. Other questions?
Hi, I have a student whose aunt and uncle had guardianship of her, that was signed over to her from the mom. When she turned 18, that guardianship expired. However, in Nebraska, she's not considered, I guess, a legal adult until 19 by state law. Whose information does she use? Does she use mom's or does she use the aunt and uncle?
Getting my trustee paper out here to see what it says. And it's asking about guardianship, correct?
Yes.
Okay, because guardianship and conservatorship are different, so that's why I clarified. Answer yes, if you can provide a copy of the court's decision that as of today, you are in a legal guardianship. So at the time that she fills out the FAFSA, if that legal guardianship is in effect, she would answer yes.
I guess since she's turned 18, it has expired.
Then she would say no.
Does the state consider her back in her parents' guardianship with that?
Yes, because she's technically still a resident of Nebraska, and Nebraska has a different age limit for what's considered an adult.
Okay.
Yeah, according to the technical definition, yes, she would say no because the guardianship has ended and she's no longer in that guardianship. She would say no, and then she would be required to provide parent information on the FAFSA. If that is information she cannot get, she doesn't have custody, they won't share that with her, I would highly recommend reaching out to that institution to see what kind of allowances they may be able to make for that student, since it was, the situation didn't change, just her age changed. And so they may have some ways to help that student if she's not able to get that documentation. Other questions? Yes, Shannon is asking if you're reaching out to an institution for a dependency override or special student situation, is the student able to go ahead and submit the FAFSA without filling out the parent information? Yes, they can go ahead and submit that. They would just mark that parent information is not available. And then at the time that they get that from the school or the college they're going to, they would be then required, and the school would walk them through that special situation. But in most instances where a student is seeking a dependency override or special situation, reaching out to parents for that information could be dangerous for them. So we don't want them to do that. We don't want to have them be in a situation where we're requiring information that we're going to remove. But we do want them to go ahead and get it filled out so that then we can make adjustments. So they would fill that out without the parent information.
I would highly suggest on the dependency override bit, here at Barton, we will contact the student that they are missing parent information. So I would suggest that they keep an eye on their emails and maybe even contact the school once they reach out to them to let them know their FAFSA has been received. Just so that way there's not a delay in processing there.
I was reviewing a few of these questions that were submitted previously, and I wasn't able to watch the chat very closely. Did anyone have questions about DACA or parents who are out of the country or who do not have US income?
We had one question about DACA students and if they could file the FAFSA.
Okay. I'm going to be honest, I don't deal with that a lot, but it's my understanding that if they're not a citizen, they're not eligible for federal aid, and being a DACA student does not give them citizenship status.
That is correct.
Okay, and so there may be instances where they're asked to fill out the FAFSA for scholarship purposes, and they could do that at that point. I have been assured that those students are not targeted or identified, so they are not at risk of being exposed for deportation or immigration issues by doing that. I do understand their concern with that process, but I have been told they can fill it out. They just would not be eligible for federal aid, but they may be able to use that for their scholarship applications if it's required. Hey, any other questions? All right. Well, I appreciate each and every one of you being here today. You will be receiving an evaluation via email following the session. We would appreciate you guys taking the time to send that back to us. This is the first time we have done this. And so if there were areas that you would have liked to have seen covered in more detail or things that we missed, we would appreciate knowing that so we can improve this. This was recorded and it will be posted on the KASFAA website. You're welcome to use that for your presentations. Send it to parents who have questions and things like that that you need to use as a resource to help those students. As always, if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to your financial aid offices. I've yet to meet someone who wouldn't help a student try to further their degree, regardless of what school they're planning to attend. Caitlin?
I think you covered it all. However, the presentation we do want to make sure that you be careful with the presentation because it is geared towards more high school counselors. We don't necessarily have a specific resource set up for parents and students at this very moment. If we do come up out with a presentation for them, we will definitely be in contact with that, whether it be a link or whatnot.
I would add to what Caitlin is saying that our committee is working on resources for the high school counselor to share with parents and families. However, it won't be available for this filing cycle of the FAFSA. It'll probably be available to you for next school year, but this is something that we are working on.